afternoon. This afternoon I'm going to talk a bit about something that is more broad than some of the topics that we've been discussing so far. It involves energy, it involves politics, it involves technology, it involves policy. But the way that I like to look at it is that it's the greatest change, physical change, that has taken place on our planet since the end of the last ice age. And for Jay, I applaud your addition of so many young people in the audience today, because this is the planet in which they're going to lead and shape in the years to come. I'd like to start with a video clip, and I ask that you look at two or three things, really. One, at the lower left, as you look at the slide, you'll see a time tick and a cursor moving on it. The other is to look at the right-hand side, and you'll see a color code for age of ice. And that's important because even though the Arctic ices and clears to varying degrees, it's really about the amount of the multi-year ice that is no longer there. And then I'd ask that you start to pay particular attention around 2007. So if you'd run that clip, thank you. And you can see it's fairly constant. Gyrations are occurring. This is actual data, it's not a projection. So you can see it's pretty dramatic. A new ocean has opened up. A lot of people, when I talk about the opening of the Arctic, think that the reason I'm so excited about it is because Navy people get excited when a new ocean appears on the planet. But it really is a significant change. There are three ice caps on the planet. This one, the Arctic, the Tibetan ice cap, and the Antarctic cap. This offers opportunity as well as challenge, and I'll talk about that in my remarks. The one that I think is extremely concerning is the Tibetan ice cap, because it feeds the great rivers of Asia. And when you couple that with the massive hydroengineering that's going on primarily in China, as those rivers move towards South Asia, Southeast Asia, 10, 20 years from now, Asia is going to have a water crisis of significant proportion. But anyway, what I'd like to do is talk about the Arctic and really focus in on that. And as I think about the Arctic, I really think about it in four ways. It's about resources, and when I talk about resources, it's energy and minerals. It's about transportation, because as that ocean opens up, it enables shipping to take place, fishing to take place, and then the third aspect is security. And I define security not in a military sense, but rather in prosperity, safety, and security, and creating an environment in which that exists. And then the fourth piece that you can't neglect is that the populations that live within the Arctic and have lived that way for millennia, their life is gone as they have known it throughout their history. And so those are the four areas that I think are important to talk about. The first area, when I think of resources, if we had talked about this even 4 or 5 years ago, we would have been fairly excited about the energy opportunities. We would have been talking about the work that Shell was pursuing up in the Arctic for some offshore drilling. But I think that the North American energy future has changed that significantly. And my sense is that energy on the North American side is probably going to be dormant for quite some time. But that doesn't change the fact that 13% estimated of the world's undiscovered oil resources are there, nor does it change the fact that about 30% of the gas reserves are there. They will continue to exist. On the Russian side, it's going to be very different. As many people have talked about, energy is Russia's one-trick pony economy. And their supplies to Asia, primarily to China, Japan, even Southeast Asia, will be very high on their priority. And I think you're going to see the energy activity on the Russian side being pretty extensive. Mining, even though we're in a bit of a depressed economy right now, zinc, iron, copper are going to be significant commodities that will come out of the Arctic and will drive a lot of the shipping issues that will be taking place. That does not begin to take into account the seabed mining that's going to be in place in the Arctic. And you can see from the video I showed you that even though the ice clearing takes place on the North American side, it's still pretty, you just have some ice compression on the Northwest Passage. Russia will stay relatively clear. Would like to talk a little bit about shipping. And you'll see a lot of things in the press about the opening of the Arctic and the shipping changes that are taking place. And there are really three routes in the Arctic. Northwest Passage over the top of Canada and the United States, and then the Northern Sea Route, which goes by Russia, and the transpolar route that allows you to go directly over the top of the pole. The Northern Sea Route is the most traveled, and you'll see in the press that, for example, in the years that I've cited here, a 54% increase in shipping, which sounds like a big number, but it's also the law of small numbers. Consider that in 2012, one of the years that's mentioned here, there were 18,000 ships that went through the Suez Canal and 13,000 ships that went through the Panama Canal. So that shipping load is probably not going to change significantly. And so what is the type of activity that we're going to be seeing up there? And I like to look at it in these categories because it begins to talk about what the future up there is going to be. I think as the ice clears, you're going to see a lot of passenger ships moving farther north, north of Greenland, really going up there to see the beauty of the region and the expanse of the region. Fishing will probably not change very much, in my opinion, because even though the ice goes away, fish will be driven by salinity, by temperature, by bottom contours. And so I think fishing won't be a rush into the high north. Oil and gas transport, there'll be some, but not quite that extensive. Cargo transport, you can see it really is what I call destination shipping. Tends to be going to the inhabited areas and to the mining sites and back out again. And the big question is about container shipping. And my view is that that's not going to change significantly for a couple reasons. Even though you can look at the route over the pole and say it takes me 7 less days to go, therefore it will be a cheaper trip and a faster trip, it's also a very unpredictable trip because the ice that has diminished, it's kind of like politics, it's all local. And so you can get into situations where that seem to be clear and you get slowed down. And the container traffic will largely be based on cost per container. And the current ships that are being built are 18,000 containers. The maximum number of containers on a ship going through the Arctic is expected to be about 2,500. So you can see that the math is just going to drive it in a very different way. On top of that, the container traffic is based on very specific on-time deliveries. And you can't predict the Arctic. Additionally, they would have to swing their routes seasonally because it's still going to get dark and cold and stormy. In fact, 2011, the least iced year in Arctic history, was also the stormiest year in Arctic history. So transit shipping, I believe, is really going to fall off or won't develop in a way that a lot of people are speculating. Shipping is also challenged by the inability to really understand what's going on up there and to sense the environment. The world in which we live is really confined to about 75 to 80 degrees north, 75, 80 degrees south as far as our communications and our sensing goes. And what will happen, as you can see from this, the ship starts to move, great shape, starts to get in difficulty, and then has to be bailed out. The other aspects is the ice that can close in and damage the ships. And on the lower right-hand quadrant, the bad charts. It's amazing that as we look at the Arctic today, 10% of the bottom of the Arctic has been surveyed, 10%. The average age of those surveys is 80 years old. And so we don't have a lot of data up there. The next aspect of the Arctic that I'd like to talk about is security. And as I said, it's not a military sense, but rather how do you make it safe and prosperous and secure. And even though Russia has been very noisy about developments that it wants to put in place, the fact of the matter is that I think the biggest adversary in the Arctic is really going to be Mother Nature. And you can see situations like this developing, and we don't have the ability to respond to these great safety issues. The reason I have the Costa Concordia on its side is that the week that happened, someone showed me a picture of a cruise ship of similar size weaving through large icebergs north of Greenland. And in the case of Costa Concordia, as you recall, they jumped in the water and they swam to that spit. That's not an option when you're up in the high north. But those are some of the safety issues. From a security standpoint, as I said, Mother Nature comes into play. How do you get your way out of trouble? And you're going to see in the press an increasing debate about the need for the United States to have more icebreakers. You can see the relative numbers of icebreakers that countries have. We essentially have one. It's over 40 years old, and it's time to recapitalize. That said, I think some of our plans and discussions about recapitalizing are just not realistic. To do a design and build will cost the country about $1 billion for an icebreaker. I think there are more opportunities in leasing or perhaps a co-production of a foreign design that could be done in Canada and the United States. So I think the icebreaker debate will be something that you'll see highlighted in the coming years. Now, I talked about Mother Nature, and it's not the polar bears that are going to get us, obviously, although I think what they must be trying to figure out is this is the biggest seal they've ever seen, and how are they going to eat it? But just by way of background, that's the USS Honolulu, based out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. That photograph was taken about 280 miles from the North Pole. So for that crew, I think they experienced some significant climate change from their transit from Hawaii up there. But this gets to the point of, what should we be doing? What should we be thinking about? And fortunately, this changing planet that we're dealing with also comes at a time of significant technological change. The Arctic, because of that void of coverage that we have, to me is perfect for unmanned systems. That lack of surveying of the bottom is perfect for unmanned underwater systems to even be able to work during the harshest winter months under the ice. But also, instead of having to invest heavily in satellite architectures, can we take the unmanned systems that are being flown today, that operate well above the air lanes, that operate well above the high winds that you encounter in the 30 to 40,000 foot levels in the Arctic, and can they stay up there and be able to survey and inform what's taking place in the Arctic? And I think they're ideally suited for that. The other challenge that we're going to face is policy. I believe that it is hugely unfortunate for the United States that we have not become party to the Convention of the Law of the Sea, which will allow us to legitimize our claims in the extended continental shelf that will come into play should we begin to go back into the energy and mineral extraction regimes in the high north. The governance structures that are in place, the Arctic Council works well. We become the chair in May for 2 years, taking over from our friends in Canada, and I think that's a good structure to move things along. Domestically, on a policy side, I think we're woefully lacking in our ability to come up with coherent Arctic policies that cut across all departments and allow us to come up with an Arctic strategy that will allow us to prosper in that region and to ensure a safe and secure Arctic.